we will not be convening into closed session at this time, but we will go forward with our regular board meeting. If you'd all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we got to open the forum now. So, all right, so we'll go to adoption of the agenda and approval of the consent calendar.
I'd like to move adoption of the agenda with a change to move closed session trailing to the end of the meeting.
All in favor? Aye. So moved. 5-0 to change the order of tonight's agenda. I see no moment of recognition. And we do have a presentation tonight by Mr. Steve Long, asking the board to consider adopting the following. Resolution to combine all parcels within the CPCSD into one single local responsibility area by the state of California for fire prevention fees. Did you want to make any comment, Mr. Ramirez?
The only change on the agenda is that the recommended action should have read receive, discuss, and consider approval of the resolution. Mr. Long is here tonight. It's about a 10-minute presentation. The resolution speaks for itself, and so will Mr. Long. So, Mr. Long.
Thank you. I appreciate you putting this on the agenda. Oh, I'm sorry.
Watch your step there, sir.
I've been told to do that a lot. The resolution that we're requesting that you approve would make the Cameron Park Community Services District as a unit treated all alike by the state regarding the fire prevention fees. Currently, and I have a map here of the district, and currently somewhere between 70 and 90% of the parcels in the district are considered a local responsibility area, which means those people within that area do not pay the state fire prevention fee because you have your local fire prevention and protection. There are about somewhere between 10 and 30% of us that are outside of that, yet we are within the Cameron Park Community Services District. And we are paying until they just suspended the collection of the fee as a part of the cap and trade trade-off for boats. We have been paying over $100 a year for this fee, even though we pay the same property tax increment that comes from the county to the Cameron Park Community Services District to provide fire protection, parks and recreation, and all the other things that all the other services you provide. So we're paying the same property taxes, but we're paying an additional fee for something we're already getting from the CSD. Now, I reviewed the cooperative fire programs agreement that you have with CAL FIRE for manning the fire stations and providing the manpower for fire protection. Nowhere in this agreement does it say that they're not going to respond to those people that are just east of Cameron Park Drive, for example. Other areas that I wonder why they were excluded is the shopping center, the Safeway Shopping Center. Now, I don't think there's going to be many wildfires in a paved and built out area. Same thing with the Bel Air Shopping Center. North of Green Valley Road, you have several parcels up there that are not in the local responsibility area. They are those of us that are outside of what is called the LRA, the local responsibility area, are considered to be in the state responsibility area. 18 months ago, my neighbor's house caught on fire. They're in Cameron Park Community Services District. Cameron Park Fire Department was there very quickly, did a great job. They had 2 rigs there before any others even showed up on mutual aid. And I don't think CAL FIRE showed up on mutual aid. We had El Dorado Hills, I think we had Shingle Springs, and so you see the initial response is the responsibility of the Cameron Park Fire Department under the CSD. And yet we're paying CAL FIRE over $100 a year for them to protect us. We don't think that's right. So what your resolution asks is, and I in a minute I will explain how I think some of those areas were excluded. In fact, I'll do it now. Within the legislation for the fire fee, there is a provision that says in establishing boundaries of state responsibility areas, the board, that's the CAL FIRE, for purposes of administrative convenience, could designate roads, pipelines, streams, or other recognizable landmarks as arbitrary boundaries. Well, for administrative convenience, for whom? All they're doing is collecting a fee from us. That is done based on the parcel numbers that are provided by our county assessor. And so if you want to really simplify things, you just get a list of all the parcels, which you get because those are the people who pay money to the CSD on the property tax. You get a list of all the assessor parcel numbers that are within the Cameron Park Community Services District, hand it to CAL FIRE and say these are in our local area. That's about as simple administratively as it can get. But anyway, I think that's how they got there. I was not in that meeting. So anyway, your resolution sums it up and says that whereas the CSD receives property tax revenue from all parcels within the district, and whereas the CSD uniformly provides fire services through a fully equipped and staffed fire department to all parcels within the CSD, and whereas the CSD has been bifurcated between a local responsibility area and a state responsibility area in administering the state of California's fire prevention fee legislation. Therefore, the CSD Board of Directors requests that all parcels within the CSD be consolidated into a single local responsibility area by the state of California. One last comment. You may wonder, why are we going to do it now? Because they just suspended the collection of those fees, supposedly for 10 years. That was a trade-off for the votes that we mentioned before. I don't know about you, but I've lived in this state for a little over 78 years, and I have seen fees that are levied for only a year, but somehow the next year they're still there, and the next year they're still there. I've seen fees that have been suspended for X number of years, and lo and behold, when somebody feels they need more money for some services, which they may or may not, I'm not arguing that, but, well, instead of suspending it for 10 years, let's make it 5 years. Nobody's going to notice. I don't want that to happen to any of us in this CSD. We all should be treated exactly the same because we are in one unified CSD. So I'm asking you to approve this resolution. By the way, Senator Gaines and Assemblyman Kiley are awaiting the passage of this and are going to send letters to CAL FIRE supporting it, as is the Board of Supervisors. So, that's my presentation. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Long.
You're welcome.
Bring it back to the board.
Sure.
The CSD currently collecting those
No, the CSD does not get those. Those are collected by the Board of Equalization and put into the state general fund. Of course, the Board of Equalization is probably going to be defunct in about a month and a half, but still, it's collected by the state and put into the state general fund. Billed directly from the Board of Equalization to the property owners. Once a year.
Could you tell me a little bit more about the vote recently at the previous Virginia?
A major issue within the state legislature is the cap and trade issue. Because it's a tax issue, it needs a 2/3 majority in the legislature. They did not have a 2/3 majority, so in order to entice some of the rural legislators to vote for that, they threw them a bone and said, well, if you vote for it, we will suspend collecting this fire fee for 10 years. They got their 2/3 vote. You're welcome.
Thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.
I'm wondering if, well, the board went through this process initiated by CAL FIRE, I want to say 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, whereby all of Cameron Park, which was an SRA, was carved up into a smaller portion of SRA and mostly the LRA.
Right.
And so I'm wondering if CAL FIRE can speak to the advantages or downside of becoming an LRA, or if there's any repercussions to the district for taking this action, as well as potentially what the determination was at the time when that recommendation was brought forward in terms of the area that was designated as an LRA.
Yes.
The board may want to do exactly as suggested. You also may want to close the matter and then bring it back to the dais for the staff to discuss it between
You could then ask the chief.
chief would come out, and then that would be a discussion amongst you. Either way works. So just
Okay, so we can
you have the full option.
finish.
Thank you.
If there's any other comments from the board.
I just have one question. You said 10 to 30%. Do you know exactly how many people are affected by this?
No,
So,
I do not.
so maybe that's something that CAL FIRE could speak to as well.
I do not know the answer to that, Margaret, but it's kind of irrelevant because if there's one parcel that's paying a fee that they shouldn't be paying, then we ought to resolve that. I got the 70% in the local responsibility area from Senator Gaines' office. That was their estimate. I believe Scott from CAL FIRE was given an estimate that it was somewhere around 90% was in the local responsibility area. That's why at the last moment here, after talking to Scott, I hedged it and said it's somewhere between 70 and 90. If you look at the parcel maps that they're dealing with, I would challenge anybody to definitively say when any parcel is in or out. They're very, very difficult to read. But I have read them.
Am I going to the public first? What would be procedural? The advisory board? Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Long.
Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
Mr. Long.
Thank you.
Chief Lindgren?
Okay, so I can answer some of the questions. One of the ones that just came up, it's...
Could you identify yourself? Please?
Oh, I'm sorry. Scott Lindgren. I'm the CAL FIRE unit chief and the chief of the Cameron Park Fire Department. So one of the questions that came up, it's actually AB 398, and it's a greenhouse gas bill, and that's the one that suspended it for 10 years until January 1st of 2031. And that's the fire prevention fee that was suspended under that AB 398. One of the things that the board needs to realize is there's a lot of things that are going on here that are regulated by the state in the PRC, which is the Public Resource Code that defines local responsibility land and state responsibility land, and then also federal responsibility land. And so that's what we're kind of talking about here. We don't want to get confused by the fire prevention fee. The fire prevention fee was something that came about, but it doesn't just dictate who pays the fee and who doesn't. I mean, that's how it was decided, was the people that are in the SRA pay the state SRA fee to CAL FIRE, and it was a fire prevention fee. It wasn't to pay for CAL FIRE services in fire attack or fire suppression or anything like that. It was only to pay for prevention side of things. The thing that the board needs to remember is even if the board did a resolution right now, that resolution would not move the land between local jurisdiction and state jurisdiction. That only happens every 5 years, and that's a review that starts with the local unit, which is me, the unit chief here for CAL FIRE in this jurisdiction, and then it goes to the region level, and then the state level, and then it goes to the Board of Forestry level. And so recently, when this land moved out of SRA into LRA, they originally wanted to include the area that we're talking about here off of Sudbury and all that. The Board of Forestry is who denied moving all of the CSD into LRA, and that was because of the threat of the wildland fire on the side of the hill where the BLM property is. So up behind Rayleigh's, there's a big portion of land up there that's all brush, and there's a special brush or plant or something that grows there that only grows there and on the Pine Hill Reserve, which is not very far. So that's a protected species, and it's a protected land that BLM owns. But it has the ability to create a big threat of wildfire to the community. And so that's what the Board of Forestry looked at when they drew that line, and that's why they said that. So the local unit actually tried to get that land all moved, the whole CSD moved into LRA, but it wasn't able to accomplish that. But it does come up for review again in 2020. Every 5 years, the state reviews that. And so if you wanted to petition to your local authority, which is me first, and then then I would take it to the region and everything else after we look at it, because we review all those boundaries every 5 years. And then it would go up to the Board of Forestry. So that's kind of how the process works. But one of the most important things I think that you need to understand is, I know that everybody's concerned about the fire prevention fee. I am too. I pay it. We didn't know anything about it until all of a sudden we started getting the bills and everything like that. We didn't know where the money was going to go, even though it had CAL FIRE's name attached to it. That all came about without CAL FIRE even knowing that it was coming about. It was done at the governor's office, and we didn't even know that they were going to do it. So it was confusing for us also, and it had our name on it. But the thing that's real important for the board to remember is the biggest difference in LRA and SRA is jurisdictional responsibility. Who has the jurisdictional responsibility to protect that land? LRA in Cameron Park, the responsibility is on you, on the CSD board, and the CSD Fire Department to protect that. On the state side, the state land, it's CAL FIRE's responsibility to protect that land from wildfire, and that's mainly what I'm talking about. So to make it kind of simple, if we were to have a large devastating wildland fire that was in the LRA and stayed in the LRA, that's your responsibility. The aircraft and the bulldozers and all the stuff that comes with that the state doesn't just give you that. The state can bill you for that unless you're under a contractual obligation like you are with CAL FIRE. And that's one of the things that I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but with an RFP, and if the board decides to go to a different fire agency, that's one of the things you're going to need to consider. If you back out of the contractual obligation with CAL FIRE and you go with a different fire department, then you're probably going to be smart to then sign a wildland contract to protect your LRA from devastating wildland fires. And in that wildland contract, or the contractual obligation that you're in right now, you don't get billed for all the aircraft and the bulldozers and the hand crews if we have a fire that starts on Sudbury and blows down into across Cameron Park Drive and towards the airport and all that stuff. We have to be very cautious of wildland fire. I'm sure everybody saw the news. I actually just got back from Sonoma County yesterday, and it was pretty devastating. And the gentleman made a comment about Safeway, and you know, that's in a big parking lot, that can't burn. you need to go to Santa Rosa and look, because a Walmart and a Kmart and an Arby's and a McDonald's and everything on the other side of the Highway 101 in a big paved parking lot all burned from that fire. So that fire did things that we haven't seen fires do before. So this is a scary time, and one of the things that we have to remember is that we live in an area that is conducive to wildfire. This is what we consider a wildland-urban interface, which, because we live in the foothills and in the hills, and we have the type of fuels that we have to be very concerned about wildfire. And I know that this board and this community is very, concerned about that and very engaged with, defensible space and weed abatement and all that kind of stuff, and that's great. The awareness level is really high. The fire safe councils and everything are doing a great job. We need to keep that awareness high, but I just wanted to make sure that you understood that the whole SRA, LRA, FRA thing, it's not just about a prevention fee. It's about who has the jurisdictional responsibility for that land. So you got to remember that. So I just wanted to say that and clarify a couple things, but any questions that you have, I'd be willing to answer, and if I don't have the answers, I'll get them for you, but I have the PRC sections and all that different stuff if you wanted all that.
So I would like to ask if you could succinctly recap CAL FIRE's stand on this in your recommendation, and then I'd like to go to
So this got brought up a few years ago when all of the land in Cameron Park moved over to LRA, the last time that this happened, and the local unit recommended that Sudbury and all this stuff that's on the map here, I'll point to it. All the stuff that's over at Pine Ridge, that all of it would be into what we call the LRA. So that was proposed by the local unit and the region, but then when it went to the Board of Forestry denied it and drew those lines based on the wildland threat that's on that other side of the freeway to the east of Cameron Park.
So the purpose of of the state collecting the fees was in order to pay for the management?
So the fees is a whole different deal, and it's a crazy deal. So the fees has to do with fire prevention activity is what they originally tried to do with it. And so a lot of that money that actually came in, we used locally here to do fuel reduction projects throughout the state. But that fee was not attached to the protection side. So none of that money went over to the fire suppression side. It didn't go to any of our airplanes or our bulldozers or our fire engines or any of that. It was all on the fire prevention side. So now that's suspended, but that doesn't really have anything to do with the jurisdictional lines. So the taxpayers of California still pay for the SRA or the LRA, depending on where they live, and that's how that works. Does that make sense? So it's more of a jurisdictional responsibility, not so much the fee. Everybody puts it on the fee, and the fee was tough for a lot of us. It was tough for me, but what they were trying to do with the fee was nice, but the way they kind of went about it, everybody wasn't too happy with. Does that make sense?
Can you repeat your recommendation?
So my recommendation is to the board, if you would like to move forward with this, then in 2020, when the state reviews it again, I will take that recommendation forward and it will go up again through the Board of Forestry. So I can do that. But I will say that honestly, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with as much of the LRA that we already have in Cameron Park, because there is a pretty significant threat to wildland fire in our community here in Cameron Park. And having that land be LRA it kind of puts the jurisdictional burden back on you rather than the state. If it was me, I'd rather have that burden on the state. We had a fire just recently, a couple months ago, up in Omo Ranch in El Dorado County, and it was 156 acres. It cost the state just under $900,000 to suppress 156 acres. That same fire could have very easily happened here in Cameron Park, and if it was in the LRA and you weren't in a contractual obligation with CAL FIRE, you could have gotten a bill for that. And so it's better to have the state burden that jurisdictional responsibility for the wildland fire suppression than a small CSD.
So even if we did follow your recommendation and it went back to the BLM or to the Bureau of Land Management,
State Board of Forestry,
they would probably deny it again.
they might.
Mr.
Right.
Ramirez?
And just to be abundantly clear, Chief, if the board directed you to do that, to consider changing the boundaries, it still has no impact on the fee.
No impact on the fee at all.
And for our new director, if you want to speak, you've got to push that button. Don't forget to push the button.
Did you have any other questions?
I'm just curious, so I understand the process, the every 5-year cycle. We've heard from Mr. Long that we have some elected representatives that are supportive of this resolution, according to Mr. Long. So is there any harm in putting it on the radar for the 2020 review cycle by passing a resolution now? Or is the issue strictly, as you articulated, in regard to the district assuming responsibility? And then I have a second question, and the second question is, if there was a fire in the Pine Hill Preserve or anywhere else on the east side of Cameron Park Drive, and it comes down into the LRA, through the mutual aid system, wouldn't CAL FIRE respond anyway?
You would, because they would, yes. Yes and no. So if the fire started on the SRA and burned into the LRA, state responsibilities, it's their burden. If it started in the LRA, in Cameron Park, in the LRA, and burned into the SRA, Cameron Park's responsibility. So would you still get all the airplanes and all that stuff? Yes, because CAL FIRE is committed to public safety and protecting life and property. Then once all that settles down, then it's going to be a discussion of who's responsible for paying the bill now. And in your current situation, because you have a contractual obligation with CAL FIRE, it doesn't matter that you have LRA or SRA. We're okay. But then where I've worked with Mr. Ramirez before in Placer County when he was an interim in the city of Auburn, the city of Auburn is not protected by CAL FIRE under contractual obligation. So they enter into a wildland contract that's based on a per acre cost to protect their community from the threat of wildland fire. And there's City of Rockland does the same thing over there, and also the town of Truckee, because they have a big mass area that has a very significant threat of wildland fire. You guys are in a lucky spot because you have LRA, but you're in a contractual obligation already. You don't have to worry about that. If you were to contract with a different fire department to provide service, then the recommendation from me would be that you get that insurance. That's your decision to have that insurance or not under the wildland contract, if that makes sense. So I can't, to answer back to your first question, I can't really make a recommendation, and I think that right now it'd be a little bit premature since we're not going to look at it until 2020. And to be brutally honest, the board can't make that decision to switch it out of LRA to SRA. It has to go up through the Board of Forestry under all 5 of those recommendations. And I can give you guys some supporting documentation that shows you how that tree works. But obviously, political support at the senator and the congressman level, obviously that carries clout, and that can sometimes influence the Board of Forestry. But that's a decision that you as a board need to make on your own based on the jurisdictional responsibility that you have. It's not just about the fee.
But even if we did pass this resolution and there was elected support of the resolution, it still wouldn't throw off the timing of the cycle, or would there be consideration of advancing that cycle?
No.
Okay.
They won't look at it until 2020.
Thank you.
It's an every 5-year thing by statute in California.
Thank you.
Would Senator Gaines back us?
I don't know. Senator Gaines and a lot of political people were just recently in Napa and Santa Rosa, and I think that the way that that fire burned and the devastation that's there, and I can tell you right now that the numbers that they're reporting in the news for fatalities and for structures lost is not accurate. It's climbing every hour over there, and it's going to be very, very bad. And that's from my firsthand knowledge. It's changed the view of a lot of people, politicians included, on protecting yourself from wildland fire. So
Maybe we better take them to lunch.
probably.
We'll go out to, can Mr. Long respond? I think, yeah, so we'll close board comment for this time and go out to the public. Mr. Long, did you want to speak?
In answer to a couple of your questions, would Senator Gaines support it? According to him, he will. Would Assemblyman Kiley support it? According to him, he will. Mike Rinaldi, the county supervisor that covers the area that is not covered in the local responsibility area, has said that he will support it as well. And he is proposing, as soon as this is passed, that as opposed to him sending a letter of support, that he would take it to the Board of Supervisors so that they would have the entire Board of Supervisors supporting the resolution. So those are the specific answers to your specific questions about the support. If that support has changed in the last 24 hours, I can't tell you. I don't talk to them every day, just occasionally, as necessary. My question to you is, if you are receiving property taxes from parcels that are outside of the local responsibility area, do you not feel that you have a jurisdictional responsibility to provide all the services that you provide to all parcels within the Community Services District to those same people? Simple question. Are we one district or not?
Thank you, sir. Any other public comment?
I think what you need to determine is, does this board of directors have the ability to change that map? Or is it a state decision? Does Senator Gaines supporting this move this up to 2017, or does it stay at 2020? And quite frankly, I'm shocked that the board doesn't know that. And quite frankly, I'm shocked that this hasn't been vetted with CAL FIRE prior to this meeting. I think that's, well, it's shocking to say the least. But those are the questions. Do you have the jurisdiction to change this map? According to this gentleman, no. Do you, Ted Gaines, or anybody else have the opportunity to move this up from 2020 to 2017? No. So, I mean, I certainly understand what Mr. Long is saying. I think what he's saying is right, but I just don't know that this is, I don't know if this is just an exercise in futility.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Any other public comments? Bring it back to the board. So I don't know. It seems that we are not able to change the timing on the review. Do you have any comment from legal counsel? Can you speak up, please? Mr. Epperson, thank you.
there's some discussion about treating all of our residents fairly, and Chief can address this, but the number of parcels that are within the CSD and pay parcel assessments that contribute to the fire department is not the same number of parcels for the entire CSD. And I don't remember what that number is, and I'm not sure if that's the delta that we're talking about when we're having this discussion about the LRA and SRA. If the SRA parcels are those parcels that are outside of the CSD's fire protection district boundaries or not. And I'm wondering if the Chief could address that.
So Chief Scott Lindgren again. To answer your question, yes. So all of the parcels that are within the CSD are paying into the protection, but the protection is not just wildland fire protection. That's where the SRA, LRA kind of comes into play. So the state's jurisdiction for SRA is only for the wildland threat. And so if you have a structure fire, a house fire within the SRA, and it's during the time that that fire could spread into the wildland, then that is automatically the state's responsibility because of the SRA. If it's in the LRA, then it's 100% the responsibility of the local jurisdiction. If it's the wintertime and there's no threat of that structure fire that's in the SRA spreading into the wildland, then it's the responsibility of the local jurisdiction. So it gets confusing, but we're mainly talking with SRA and LRA wildland jurisdiction from wildland fires. It could be a vehicle fire that your car catches on fire and then in the SRA and then spreads to the wildland, then that would be CAL FIRE's responsibility. So everybody that's in the CSD right now pays a fee to the CSD for fire and emergency services. That includes structure fires, wildland fires, car fires, kids locked in cars, a rattlesnake in your yard, you lock yourself out, anything that you need help with. The taxpayers that are within the CSD are getting that service, that emergency service from the fire department now. All of them, whether they're in the SRA or the LRA. We're just talking about the jurisdictional responsibilities for wildland fires, what we're talking about. And it's easy to get confused because of the SRA fee and that kind of stuff. The fire prevention fee is actually a better term for it than an SRA fee, because it's not paying for the protection, it's paying for the prevention is how it was slated. But, that's where it's at.
So I think my point was that not all parcels in the Cameron Park CSD are paying the fire parcel portion of the assessment to the CSD, because there are parcels in the CSD that are served by county fire. As an example, when you go up Meter Road, and it just so happens that also happens to be in the SRA once you're getting up into Meter Road.
Correct.
So that's where I was going with being treated fairly by the CSD. It's not.
And they are treated fairly by the CSD. And then you brought up mutual aid, and we also have another term that we use called automatic aid, and that's, we send the most appropriate, closest resources, regardless of jurisdiction, to the emergency, and that's an El Dorado County Fire Chiefs Association agreement that has the auto aid and mutual aid agreement. So that doesn't even matter whose jurisdiction it is. You're going to get the local fire departments, whether it's Shingle Springs or El Dorado Hills or Rescue, all to come and help, because we're all going to help each other. So the service is going to be the same. It just depends on where you live, what you're paying.
Mr. Ramirez?
Whether or not the board wants to move forward with a symbolic resolution is a separate consideration. It would be helpful, I think, for the board to know exactly how many parcels are paying how many parcels are paying the tax that basically maintains all your functions, and what parcels aren't. And so that might be something down the road, which is a separate issue, potentially. As the General Counsel said, you could go forward with a symbolic vote of confidence, or you could assign this to your fire committee for further discussion.
And that was going to be my question, is if it came to the fire committee in the first place, and obviously it did not.
It did not. It was something that Mr. Long wanted to bring forward first. Let the whole board hear it. I think you've got a much better grasp of the issues.
Yes.
Now you can get down into the nitty-gritty.
And if I may make one more comment, some other boards out there, districts and counties, have come out symbolically and opposed the fire prevention SRA fee, the tax, but not confusing it with what the jurisdiction means. You know, so it's two different things there. You know, you can oppose the tax, but being in the SRA and being in that jurisdiction is some good insurance for you when it costs as much as it costs to suppress these things.
Thank you,
So
Chief.
just something I wanted you to consider.
Thank you so much. So bring it back to the board. What's the
I'd
pleasure?
like to motion to move this to the fire committee for further consideration.
I would second that.
Director Stanton and I think Director Moore, all in favor of moving this to this item to the fire committee for further vetting. Motioned and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Mr. Long. We'll see you at the fire committee. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chief. All right. It is now time for open forum.
Well, something that's very enlightening has happened in the last 5 or 6 months since Mr. Ramirez has been here. I know in a short period
Wait,
of time...
Hold on, please.
You hear me now?
Mr. Long, were you going to stay for the meeting? Are you staying for the meeting, sir? Okay. Thank you. Would you assist him? Thank you, JR. Thank you, sir. Yes, Mr. Carey, thank you so much.
Lost my train of thought. Something really enlightening has happened here within the last 5 or 6 months since Richard came in here. And very refreshing. I think maybe this could be against policy, but whenever I found that Richard made a mistake and did something wrong, he apologized for it. I've never, ever seen this happen in the tenure of the last general manager, and not the whole board here now, because I'm not going to criticize the two ladies that have just started. But here is something that just seemed so unbelievable to me, that someone in this district found that they made a mistake and they admitted to it. Again, never happened before. I think with what he stepped into here, this mess that we had over 5+ years with Mary Cahill, and what he's done to turn this around just is beyond belief. In a short period of time, working short days. I'd just like to thank you for that, Richard. You know, we probably wouldn't be searching for a new general manager except that a federal agency come in here and found out that this general manager that we had was abusing her employees and not paying them overtime, and therefore the board didn't do this. Matter of fact, I think today, if this government agency hadn't come in here and found all the problems that we have, that Mary Cahill would still be here. And the reason that I feel that way is just prior to this investigation, the two board members that were here at the time gave Mary Cahill a new contract and a pay raise. If this isn't complicit, or we had members on this board that were so dumb that over 5+ years they couldn't see how she was destroying this district, intimidating her employees, going after members of the community, me being one of them,
and alienating businesses in this community, and they did nothing about it. And even to this point, right now, today, you probably couldn't get either one of them to admit that they did anything wrong. They were either blind to everything that was going on here or didn't know how to do their job.
Thank you, Mr. Carey.
I'd like to pick up on some of the things that the chief said. As per CAL FIRE yesterday, the statistics on the fires raging in Northern California were 42 people dead and up to 6,000 structures destroyed in the various fires. Let me repeat that. That was yesterday, 42 dead, 6,000 structures burned. And according to what the chief has said, it's going up. These are yesterday's statistics. Now, the chilling thing about what happened in Santa Rosa is that most of the areas that was devastated are classified by insurance company actuarial tables as medium to low fire risk areas. As the chief said, Cameron Park is classified as a high fire risk area. Yet the board has done nothing to move weed abatement forward. From here on out, all 5 of you will be accountable for any damage due to your lack of action on this issue. And I don't want to hear, I'm new. I don't want to hear, I'm only one vote. Each of you has the ability during matters to and from to request that weed abatement be on the next agenda. You can call for a vote on working with the county and funding removal of the weeds on their right-of-way. Each of you can demand that the CSD weed abatement ordinance is on the next agenda and that it has the necessary strength to be effective and get the private lots that need cleaning taken care of. Each and every one of you, write this down, Margaret, you have the opportunity to do that during matters to and from, and you've had that opportunity all along. You have not availed yourself of it, and there are members on this board, 3 of them for 2 years, have not availed themselves of that. None of you can hide from your responsibility any longer. You are now all aware. You've heard the chief. You've seen the statistics. You've seen the video. You are aware of the situation at Cameron Park, and you are now culpable for your inaction. And the fact that weed prevention, the fact that weed abatement is not on this agenda is inaction. And it continues to be inaction. Now, I'm not going to stick around for this meeting. There's not enough here to interest me. But I guarantee you, I will check with the confirmed agenda, and there will not be one person that comes up during matters to and from and suggests any of this be in November. Because November is when it should be talked about. Actually, it should have been talked about in August, so it would start in November. You're behind the curve again. So we're going to go to 3 years with nothing. 3 years with more weeds. 3 years with more fire danger. You should be ashamed of yourselves.
Thank you, Mr. Lilpop.
You're welcome. Roll your eyes. Go ahead.
Barbara Rogers, Cameron Park. I couldn't agree more with Gerald. You guys just drag your feet. You don't get anything done. Of course, the 2 board members up there that really allowed what happened here these past years can't even admit to what they did was wrong. Can't even say we made a big mistake. And as long as you keep ignoring what we're saying, we're going to keep saying it. So with that said, as you know, I'm here for my fire department. I've said it over and over again. It used to be the Oakland Hills. Now I can tell you Santa Rosa, Sonoma, Calistoga. I can name them off. I follow it very closely. This firestorm came in at what, 9:30, 9:45 at night. The winds were blowing so hot. It was really hard for me to understand how these houses burned. So I asked my other half, retired Assistant Fire Chief George Goolsby, who, by the way, is not my husband, but my significant other. I go, George, how could this happen in an area like that in Santa Rosa? We have friends and relatives that live there. We've been in that area many times. He goes, that wind blew that firestorm so hot, so fast, it blew the windows out, burned the houses down. Cameron Park, people, Cameron Park. Where I live and sit on my upper deck on Heights Drive off of Royal by the golf course, all I see is a canopy of trees west to the Catholic Church. Sitting up there the other night, I told George, I go, you know what? And we've said it before, pardon my expression, our ass is grass if we get a big fire coming in our townhouse we're out of, we don't even have a plan, and we're retired fire people. It's scary, and I don't think you guys care. Margaret and Greg is who I'm directing this to. I can't blame the other ladies for voting for this RFP process, because I think they knew. I don't think Monique, I think she abstained. How you people can even look at another fire district is beyond me, when we have the best. I don't care how much it's going to cost to protect this community. You don't realize what you're giving up. You don't realize the resources you're giving up. You're not going to get the tankers. You're not going to get the dozers. You're not going to get the hand crews. Oh, you're going to get capable fire people. I'm not going to say they're not. But in something like this, we already have the best. And we're going to have it like now, right now, not, okay, we better get a hold of CAL FIRE. I don't know what the whole thing is. And, you know, this may slop over into the wildland, into the, you know, state responsibility areas. Now we're going to bring in the big guns. Just look up at that hill above Bel Air, people. Look at that hill. That's exactly what they're talking about. And then look at your south side over here. And then start looking down here where it goes up to the church. And then there's areas, I know, across from where Bill and David live. I was at David Gelber's house one day looking down in this huge wildland area. I mean, you guys don't have our public safety at heart, because if you did, you wouldn't even be thinking about throwing away one of the best fire department as far as I'm concerned. The best. They are out there busting their butts. Not that the other ones aren't, but they're the ones that bring everything we need. And I'm going to keep harping on this and harping on this.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. Any other public comments? Thank you very much. Okay, let's move to item number 5. Public hearing to consider adoption of the Cameron Park Community Services District fiscal year 2018 budget. The recommended action, review and consider adopting the draft fiscal year 2018 budget for the Cameron Park Community Services District.
Madam Chair and members of the board, you had a number of reviews of your budget. The budget and the reserves are presented. As indicated earlier, in May from today, you have a much better idea of what your financial picture is, and it's much improved. You still are going to be dealing with some issues down the road, but I really have nothing else to add based on all the information that you've received. With the reserves, you are capable of maintaining your current service levels, but I would caution you that come mid-year, you will want to have a robust review with the community on exactly where you want it, what you want to do going forward. But you're in good financial shape, other than a operating deficit that is manageable, and I will return it back to the board for any questions.
Thank you very much. Any comments from the board at this time? Director Stanton, let's start down there.
Thank you, Director Morrison. Thank you, Mr. Ramirez. You know, we've discussed this budget multiple times. I think that no one is happy in seeing a structural operational deficit that we are looking at now. We've had discussions in regard to, as Mr. Ramirez just alluded to, the need to take a hard look at not only the expenditure side, but the revenue side. And I think that check-in is going to happen probably at mid-year at this point. I think the budget is what it is. And I'd say reluctantly I'm going to support it. But we've got, and I appreciate Ms. Rogers' comments, and I don't disagree with her assessment of CAL FIRE. I've certainly made those comments myself multiple times. But the fact of the matter is, Over the past 2 years, it's $660,000 increase in the fire costs, and in the next fiscal year, I would anticipate, if I understand CAL FIRE's projections, it's going to be a significant increase from there as well. And so you're not going to get yourself out of a structural deficit by renting more rooms. Don't get me wrong, we need to continue to promote the center and promote programs and increase revenue. But when you're looking at up to $1 million swing in 3 years, and don't quote me on the numbers, that's significant, and that's going to take some outreach to the community, as Mr. Ramirez said, and some decision making on how we're going to fund that. And not to mention the fact that we're experiencing some pretty robust increases in property values, and we all know at some point that's going to go down, and that's just going to add to the problem that we're going to have in terms of meeting our needs, providing the services to our community. So again, I support the budget as written at this point, but I think we're going to have to take a hard look at it come February, and there may be some significant cuts that need to be made. Sorry.
Thank you.
I will vote in favor of the motion, but I have several reservations. I haven't had the opportunity to review the proposed budget like the majority of the board has. But I do understand we have a mid-year budget review. So at this point, based upon the recommendations of the budget committee and our interim general manager, and the fact that we have the opportunity that if the budget is off course, that we can bring it back in line, that I would support this.
Thank you.
Thank you. I am too disappointed in going and running a structural deficit. I feel like mid-year is going to be extremely important to us, and I would like to encourage staff and everything we can do to keep expenses in line and look at opportunities for revenue going forward, because that's the only way we're going to get out of this. And so we have a lot of planning to do, and mid-year is going to be extremely important.
Thank you, Director Morris. I think that the three remaining board members are well aware of the work that Interim General Manager Ramirez has had to do in beginning this position, and it's taken this long since the end of the first quarter to get this budget in line, to understand where our money is and was, and to organize our system. And I believe that this was due to be approved by the 1st of October. We're behind the 8 ball, if you will, at this point. The 2 new board members are coming up to speed. We are looking forward to new leadership, and I think that, unfortunately, I have to agree to support the budget at this time, with being able to really do a full review at midterm.
And if I can just add, it's been the general manager's recommendation that a deficit elimination plan be developed by the incoming general manager, whomever that may be. And I think that's going to be key for this board in order to make decisions come February on how to proceed moving forward. And so I'm confident that Mr. Ramirez will communicate that information to the next person that comes into your seat.
Okay, we'll go up for public comment, please.
I gotta get out. I've listened to this verbal garbage for so many 10 or 12 years here, and every time I hear a government agency like this say fiscal responsibility and good money management, and I hear it 6 years from him and 3 years from her, and I hear it over and over and over again. And in the future, we are going to make plans to do things different and do things better and save money. And their only complaint is the fire department is going to cost us so much money. Well, I say this community center is never going to rent enough rooms and bring enough people in here to change our revenue. The only thing that will do it is property taxes will go up, and maybe you'll get enough money to do things right. But if you think you're going to do the right thing, you haven't yet, and I don't think the ones that have been here for all these years that blabber about what they're going to change and haven't done anything are going to change anything.
Thank you, Mr. Carey.
I'm Barbara Rogers, and I'm going to agree with Bill. How many years have you been operating with the structural deficit? You know, I know the history. I know you don't like hearing it. But before this building was built, this wasn't going to be an issue. But the people that pushed this building knew it was going to be an issue. I have a Mountain Democrat article, Alan Clark, stating we're going to have to go after a fire tax when he was pushing this building. Because they knew this building was going to drain the budget. All the years that it's drained the budget, where would you be every year if it hadn't been for the savings of CAL FIRE to plug your deficit? Greg, Margaret, you were there. Holly, well, you know. I mean, they were the only department that saved any money for years. But now they got a pay raise, and we all knew that day was going to come. The cost of my public safety far exceeds this building. I don't care if this building is even here. I really don't, I have to tell you. Because this building and these programs are draining the budget, and you all know it, but you won't admit it. Mr. Ramirez provided our rental, our usage, facility usage report. Hundreds of hours, thousands of hours that this building's not used. But we're going to let's put the blame on the fire department. No, I say no. And I'll also tell you, as far as that fire equipment money goes, that I think they're being rather generous, because my figures are a heck of a lot more than $665,000 that they've collected. And I don't care how you slice or dice it, Cahill dumped that into the general fund with no tracking, and nobody's going to tell me that that money wasn't used to fund parks and recreation. Because in fact, gentlemen and ladies, it was told to a prior chief way back, I'm taking that fire money to fund parks and rec. And if maybe people trusted certain members on the board, certain members of the board would have been told this. But because there is, I don't think, a real trust of certain people, people are not open. That's why probably the employees never came forward either until the crap hit the fan. So, you know, you can sit there and blame the fire department all you want, Greg. I want my fire department, figure out where the money's going to come from.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. Any other public comments? Seeing none, we'll come back. Oh, yes, sir.
Just a clarification on the recommendation, that should read that review and consider adopting the resolution that was in the staff report of the fiscal year 2018 budget.
Review and consider
Adopting the resolution of the fiscal year budget as presented.
not the draft, the resolution.
Director Morrison, I'd like to make a motion, but before I do, I'd like to address some of the comments from the public.
Yes, sir.
One of the comments was that a former board member from several years ago made comments that a fire tax was going to be necessary. That's right in the fire master plan. That is, the first one, 2008, 6, 2. So that's something that the fire department put together in conjunction with the CSD a long time ago. So I don't think that's something that comes as a surprise, or shouldn't. Secondly, I don't blame CAL FIRE in any way, shape, or form. All I'm pointing out is the reality of the cost of service, and if the community wants to pay for that service, we're going to have to engage the community to assist. And as I've said before, time and time again, they've done a fantastic job. They're the reason why the majority, regarding the discussion we had earlier, the majority of our residents didn't pay a fire tax for the last 2 years until it got repealed. The services they provide are second to none. But those services are significantly increasing in cost, and we're going to have to figure out a way to pay for those services if we're going to retain them. And certainly that may be, again, engaging the community, but maybe the lagoon does get shut down. Maybe there's other programs and services that this community doesn't want in order to fund its fire service. But that's something that the community is going to have to get engaged in, and we're going to have those conversations in order to move forward. And Ms. Rogers left, but in regard to the comment about the structural deficit for years, we haven't operated at a structural deficit for years. We've operated a balanced budget operationally for the past several years, and then we have taken money out of reserves to fund capital improvements that have been deferred. And I think there's a significant difference to that. Maybe it's mincing words, but that's my opinion. So with that, I'd like to move adoption of resolution
2017.
Thank you. I'm trying to turn to it. 2017-18. Thank you very much.
2017-18. Do you want to read it into the record?
I'd like to waive reading and just say it's a resolution adopting the Cameron Park Community Services District fiscal year 2018 operating budget.
Do you have a second to that? Seconded by Director Wooten. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? 5-0 to adopt the resolution 2017-18. Move on to item number 6, Recreation, Parks, and Fire Impact Mitigation Fee Agreement with El Dorado County for the collection of fees on behalf of the Cameron Park Community Services District.
Madam Chairman and members of the board, this is has a long history. Some of it based in strife and angst. To summarize, what's before you is based on a lot of discussion and dialogue, an agreement that if the board so chooses to adopt, would enable the county then to allow the district to start drawing down its impact fees, provided we meet a number of other requirements, other reports that have to be filed with the county. The indemnification agreement, I will suggest that you ask specific legal questions about the agreement and what does it do to the district, and I have you direct those to the General Counsel. But in essence, in adopting this, it enables you to move forward to start drawing down your development impact fees. And with that, I will take questions and allow General Counsel to summarize exactly what the agreement is doing.
Why not?
Thank you, sir, and I appreciate your overview and your perspective on the fact that the agreement is a pretty good agreement. It's my understanding that failure to enter into the agreement, the consequence of that is that the district cannot collect any fees because the district under statute doesn't have the authority to collect those fees. So by not entering into the agreement, then we would be subject to losing those impact fees. And then secondly, you mentioned the information that the district provides. The district has gone through and done nexus studies which is the information that we provide to the county that demonstrates there's a correlation between the fees collected and the services provided, or how the funds are going to be spent. And then we also have an engineering study that determines the actual assessment per parcel that's provided to the county, and the district's been doing that for several years and been doing it successfully, with one exception of note, actually. So I know the indemnity language looks onerous when you read it. It looks pretty one-sided, but I think, given my knowledge of the person that wrote it, that they're very thorough and very good at what they do. And as you mentioned, it's pretty much standard language, and I don't see any reason not to support it.
Well, I can't comment on whether or not you're going to support it, but as far as everything else you said, yes, of course I would agree with that. And I don't want anyone to be left with the impression that it's my obligation to point out the positives and the negatives, and I don't want anyone to overemphasize the negatives. It looks like very standard language to me and a standard agreement, and would allow the district to benefit from the collection of those fees.
And the only other question I have, and you may not have the answer to this, is whether or not this has come before any other special district boards.
They're all looking at it this month. The one thing I would caution is that a couple of your nexus studies are getting long in the tooth. In other words, you haven't done your mandatory 5-year update. So even if you adopt this, you may be faced with having to go through and update those agreements. I'm going to have to look at the last time you did it. But I did read 2 years.
Yeah.
I did look at just a cautionary note.
Thank you.
I did look at the document, and it was well done.
I think so. Thank you, sir.
Did I hear you say that we are not collecting those fees currently?
The fees are currently being collected at the same rate as they have been. We're not in a big building mode right now, and we do have building going on. And the county does continue to collect those. They just go into an account. And we have a sizable balance both in your fire impact fee account, which your fire department has worked with folks to try to get this drawn down for some time. The indemnification agreement is what's stalled it. And you have a large balance in your park impact fee account also. In both cases, I believe in fire it's over $1 million, and in parks it's over $600,000.
Thank you, Director Scobie. Director Wooten, any comment? Director Moore?
Yeah, I have a question. You mentioned the 1% administration fee, and it looked like it's mutually agreed upon if that'll go up. Is that correct? Because that's what I read in here. And how do they account for that administration fee if it does go up?
I don't believe it will automatically go up. There is a provision for them to say there is a increased cost that is beyond the 1%. There's also a process for us to, I don't want to say appeal, but have a candid conversation over how that number is being arrived at. So there is a give and take, even if you go beyond the 1%.
Just to add to that briefly, I think the provision you're referring to is in Section 3, and I would say, I would point out that it says upon mutual agreement of the parties. Now, how exactly that takes place, or how long it takes, I don't know. But it implies that there's going to be a discussion in the future if, in fact, it has to go above and beyond the 1%.
That's what I was thinking.
That's correct. It beacons out of the impact.
Okay. So then the other question I have is, does it change anything with the disbursement? Will that process remain the same? This is just really basically saying that we're indemnifying them.
Collection.
So they're allowing them to collect and then you're indemnifying them.
Correct.
Okay.
Any public comment on this issue? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. So this is agenda item number 6. El Dorado County is requiring all agencies enter into an agreement to allow the county to collect the Parks, Recreation, and Fire Impact Mitigation fees on behalf of the Cameron Park Community Services District. These fees are collected by El Dorado County upon issuance of all building permits for development within the CPCSD. The agreement will clearly define the rights and duties of each party and provide for the CPCSD to defend, indemnify, and hold the county harmless against any claims resulting from its activities related to the CPCSD fees. And the recommended action: receive, discuss, and subject to review by General Counsel, approve the agreement with El Dorado County for the collection of the impact mitigation fees collected by the county on behalf of the Cameron Park Community Services District.
Motion to approve the agreement with El Dorado County for the collection of impact mitigation fees collected by the county on behalf of the Cameron Park Community Services District.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second, Trustee Moore. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? 5-0. Thank you very much. Let's move on to item number 7, Cameron Park sign standards.
Yes, so the Cameron Park Design and Review Committee has worked diligently over the past couple of months to develop guidelines that would be consistent with the new sign ordinance. The board really hadn't had an opportunity to look at the sign guidelines in great detail beyond our last meeting, where Mr. Harris came forward, gave a short presentation. I know the board has several questions about the design guidelines. Mr. Harris is here. To preface it, those questions are really trying to get at the issue of what's in the best long-term interest of the board, of the district. And so with that as a preface, both Mr. Harris is here in an attempt to answer some of those specific questions that you have. Mark, I want to thank you very much for all the work that you've done on this, and
all right.
And thank you for your patience in getting to this point.
Well, thank you, and thank you for taking a look at this proposal. This is something we've been working on for many years, as some of you know. We've been back here a few times, and have always been successful in having these approved. What we've had happen, though, is as we've presented to the county, there's been a lot of changes in the county over the years as far as the adoption of the county ordinance, sign ordinances. Was sent it back to us to revamp our sign standards to overlay on top of the county ordinance. So I'm here to answer any of your questions you may have.
Mr. Harris, would you mind just giving a brief overview of the Design Review Committee and your charge?
Yes.
And how you were appointed to that committee?
Okay.
For the benefit of the board members that are new to
Yeah.
the board?
So the Cameron Park Design Review Committee is a county committee. There are 5 members. We're appointed by the Board of Supervisors. So our task is to review guidelines for Cameron Park area, not necessarily the service district itself. We take in the Cameron Park economic sphere of influence. The committee is charged with commercial, industrial, and multifamily projects, not residential projects. What we do is we review new projects that come in and make recommendations of those projects back to the county. As far as any changes we'd like to see, the county takes them under advisement and then makes their recommendation to the project plan. Each committee member is appointed for 4 years, and can be reappointed. As in my case, I've been there 10 now. So with that, that's pretty much what it is.
Can I ask a question about who's on the committee currently?
Yes. On the committee chair is currently chaired by Vince Maloney. There is also Jane Layton. Oh, I should say Vince Maloney is an architect. Jane Layton is a local real estate agent. Diana Adderley is, who's been on the committee many years, is a land use planner. And
an ALAFCO.
Pardon me?
An ALAFCO commissioner.
Yeah. And Josh DeVelbis is also an architect down in Sacramento, and he also serves on the Sacramento Design Review Committee. And myself, Mark Harris.
When are these meetings and where are they posted?
The meetings are held monthly. They're held down at the fire department on Country Club. We have our meetings the fourth Monday of every month. We welcome you all to come. And we're open to the public, and all our minutes are posted and agendas are posted through the county.
Yeah. And what time is it on Monday?
Oh, 6:30.
Dr. Schofield, any questions? Could you give a brief overview of what the difference is from Cameron Park to the county on the sign?
Yeah, probably one of the biggest differences, besides some minor differences on signage size, because the county's sign ordinance is designed to encompass the entire county, and our standards are designed to look at more Cameron Park itself. One of the biggest differences are Highway 50 signs, or signs for Highway 50 to attract traffic into Cameron Park or to any other community. What we want to do is make sure that the signs, Highway 50 facing signs, do not clutter one another. So if you have a sign, another sign doesn't go up in front of it. We're also designed to not interfere with the scenic view of the areas. Also to ensure that signs are no taller than are really needed for a particular business. A good example is down on Cameron Park Drive, a Valero station was just changed to a mobile station, and the committee worked with the rebranding of that. There was a tall 40, 50-foot sign that was there, had been there for years, and we had that removed, and we made some concessions, and we think it came out much better to having that big old sign there. And that's sort of what we're trying to do. Yeah.
Any questions?
Director Morrison, after you're done, I have some more questions. Okay. So, you said that it's businesses and it doesn't really affect the community service district or just residential because, we have signs that we put out all the time as a district, and we also have signs on 50.
Correct.
So, right here you have under definitions, I think you said no billboards. And we do have billboards, and we have billboards that are not necessarily that pretty. They are plastic, signs that are up. Does that mean that we are prohibited from improving those or making them look better?
No, actually, Cameron Park Community Service District signs fall under the category of government signs, and all those signs are exempt from these standards. Now, they would be subject to other regulations, could be the county or state, but as far as these sign standards, they're exempt. So that would include even the ones on the other side of Highway 50 that's sitting on private property.
Okay, so they're government. Okay, that's nice.
Right.
So what about if we wanted...
We're not bound by...
And we can make improvements?
To those signs?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we would have you wouldn't even come in front of us for any changes you wanted to make. Because all those are, as far as Cameron Park Design Review Committee is concerned, those are all exempt. Now, the county may want to do something different. You have to take that up with the county itself.
Okay. The other question I have is if we wanted to add a billboard. Because as you know, from an advertising perspective, and I'm talking marketing, one of the best assets we have is our signs to let us know, that people know, because it's so hard to reach people, and 50 corridor is a great way to do that. if we were to add a billboard, would this not be allowed under this sign ordinance?
This would not be, any signs that you wanted to add would be exempt from our review. So we would not stand in your way. Speaking personally, I like the idea because I believe that it is an effective means to communicate with the community. But as far as the sign standards go, there is no objection to that because they would still be considered government signs which are exempt.
Even on 50, adding a billboard would be considered government?
Yes. As far as these sign standards go, I keep emphasizing that because I mean, Caltrans, there could be other agencies that could get involved, but as far as these sign standards, it would have no impact.
Safety and security. So that was my question, what signs we were able to do. I've been talking about signs for years. Most people don't know that they pass through Cameron Park, that we have a lake,
Mm-hmm.
that we have an airport, that we have a dog park, that we have, parks and recreation.
And again, speaking of that, any type of directional signs are also exempt. Like say directional signs to Cameron Park Lake or to the dog park or any other facilities that we have here in Cameron Park. Directional signs are exempt. So any of that type of stuff would all be exempt.
So would the design review committee advise the district as to possibly not being in compliance, or would we have to go to the county for approval, or wait till they came to us?
Well, the design review committee would be more than happy to work with the district as far as any signs that they wanted to do and work it through the county. If the county had any objections or issues, we could work together to come up with something that would be satisfactory to everybody.
Thank you very much. And could I ask, were there significant changes that were made to your initial proposal once it went to the county?
The biggest thing was once the county established their new sign ordinances, it created a lot of duplication because what had happened, the original ordinance, county sign ordinance, it was decades old. And so when when we first proposed it, we were bringing into our sign guidelines many different things that the original sign ordinances didn't even speak to. Pole signs, billboards, things like that. But the new county sign ordinances, they speak to most of those issues. And what we're trying to address were items that weren't being addressed by the county that impacted Cameron Park. And specifically, more things that were size variances, how much some people put signs on their office. They will put signs as part of the wall, facade of a building. And so we start talking about smaller sizing on that. A lot of what we're trying to do, we're not trying to hinder business. Our goal is to make business to be more business friendly so that businesses know in advance what is good and what isn't, because we're trying to make Cameron Park a more beautiful place.
Thank you, sir.
One additional question. Mr. Harris.
Yes.
Section 130.16.090 on page 19, the prohibited signs.
Okay.
Page 54?
Page 54 of the package, yes.
Page 54 in the packet.
Sorry, thank you.
Yes. I got it.
So I'm on page 19.
Well, it's 19 on mine, but it's section 130.16.090 at the bottom.
Let me...
you probably know what it is.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
It talks about prohibited signs.
Correct.
And under A, it's attention-getting devices, pennants, streamers, spinners, feather banners, balloons, inflatable signs, beacons, flashlights, etc. I just wanted, if you could clarify for us, because the county's sign ordinance allows those for new businesses to advertise and to attract customers.
Correct.
And this doesn't, the way it's written, appears to be more stringent than the county's ordinance. just on appearance.
Right. What we are trying to do with this section, along with, new businesses, they're allowed to have 30 days of putting up, grand openings, putting up flags, banners, things like that for a period of 30 days. But what we're finding so often is businesses are putting these things up permanently. And the county allows it for 30 days only, but enforcement is pretty limited. What we are trying to do by this is if somebody has a reason that they need to have a period longer than 30 days, they would need to go through a special use permit to demonstrate why they would need something different than the 30 days which is permitted. Don't have any examples for you offhand, but that's basically the idea behind it. If somebody wanted to go beyond the 30 days, they'd have to go through a special use permit.
Would you consider just amending that paragraph to say something to the effect of that they are prohibited beyond the duration allowed by county ordinance or something
yes,
like
that? That would be fine.
So that it's just clear to the reader that if
yes.
you're a brand new business, you can still put out a
right.
banner.
Yeah, for new businesses, the intent here was never to prohibit new businesses from attracting customers and letting people know, but it'd be no problem with making that a change.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to go back to the billboards. I'm stuck
okay.
on that because I think that's a huge opportunity for us. So, in his says here it's prohibited, and you say for commercial, but for government use. And is that you also have backlit signs and any kind of limited signs. So, what about electronic signs that have messaging on it? And also, what about being able to sell the sponsorships on those signs and use it as a revenue driver?
Well, now the county currently is prohibiting electronic signs along the Highway 50 corridor. So that would be something that need to be taken up with the county on that, especially as a government agency. You want to do something for emergency services or emergency situations or just communicating with the community. As far as billboards, off-site billboards are prohibited by our guidelines, commercial or industrial billboard signs for off-site premises, which basically, in case someone doesn't realize, I have a business in Section A and over in Section B down the street or down the road, I want to put up a additional billboard sign that's advertising my business. This isn't speaking to signs directly on the adjacent property.
Any public comment? No, let's bring it back to the board then. What's the pleasure of the board?
I'd like to move approval of the Cameron Park sign standards with the just slight modification to section 130.16.090, just clarifying the county ordinance
right.
in that section.
No problem with that.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Do I have a second to Director Stanton's motion?
Can I ask one more question? Is this you're continuing with the design review committee now, even if this ordinance gets signed, correct?
Pardon me?
Does the design review committee continue on an ongoing basis?
Oh yes, yeah. This is
okay.
This is just when we first started this, we're in the midst of a recession in this country, and we thought one of the easiest things to tackle during a recession would be signs because business was very slow. Little did we know, 9 years later that we'd still be doing this. But this design review committee is an ongoing committee. It's not limited to just sign ordinances, and we have in the works we have landscape plans. We did 6 years ago now, we did a community forum about what the community wanted Cameron Park to look at, and we called it the Vision 2030 group. And within that, there were 5 different elements that we looked at, signs being one, landscaping, building design, forgetting the rest at this point. But the idea was we'd take each of these one step at a time, and the original thought was signs would be the first one we'd tackle. Hopefully the next ones go a little faster.
May I recommend that there be a second, just for sake of discussion, just from a...
Do you have a second? I'll second. second the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye?
How many?
Discussion.
Is there more discussion?
Oh, no, I think that the only thing,
That's when we,
the only thing I
been
want to say is I know this has
seconded.
been a labor of love, and it's not easy to do, and I think it's very much needed just because we need to have parameters so that people don't, do things, but, I
Thank you.
appreciate your help.
Thank you.
I was at that meeting 9, 12, 20 years ago, whatever that was. And, this is a baby
Mm-hmm.
being born. So congratulations.
Thank you.
And call for the vote. Any other comments?
I was just going to say that I participated in the Envision 2030 with yourself and Mr. Hughes and so many others leading that, and it was a great community engagement. Remember all the different, just like we did on the community panel, all the different things on the walls, and stickers, and identifying the important things to the community, and just a lot of hard work and effort, and really appreciate all of your continued work and effort, not only there but on the design review committee as well.
So we're doing town center next?
Pardon me? Town center.
Across from Faber.
I know.
All right.
Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
And it's a group effort by a lot of people. Thank you.
And can we get clarification on who made the second?
I made the second.
You did, okay.
Director Morrison made the second.
Okay.
Yeah.
I waited. Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 5-0. Thank you very much.
And thank you again for your patience. I'm sorry it took us so long to get to this point.
Diligence. And item number 8, resolution of the Board of Directors of the Cameron Park Community Services District establishing a retention policy for critical job skills. Mr. Ramirez?
Madam Chair and members of the board, many agencies adopt a policy document often referred to as a recruitment and retention plan for the agency. In that document, there will be a number of sub-policies, which would include such things as your market area for determining compensation. It would include such things as truncation issues, where you want to keep space between certain classes of jobs within a job family. It'll also include an element that will address retention. And what you have before you is that element. The other components of a retention of a recruitment and retention plan really take some time in drafting. This component is usually one of the simplest elements in the plan, and people either embrace it or they don't. So I want to just go through the report very quickly, indicating that the district hires and invests in its workforce to provide services to the residents. Regrettably, over time, the district is subject to losing its investment and the institutional memory of key workers who leave the agency solely for better compensation. Often this type of worker is torn between leaving the organization solely for compensation, the needs of their family, and their loyalty to the organization, community, and their coworkers. To that end, a retention policy attempts to recognize the above facts and make compensation adjustments in an attempt to keep the worker and his or her institutional memory. This is not to suggest that ultimately market conditions in most cases will drive those kinds of decisions, stay or leave. Nevertheless, having a retention policy provides at least an arrow in the district's quiver to deal with those workers who, under certain circumstances, take with them more than we will gain back over time. The retention policy criteria, as outlined here, would be a requirement for a worker to meet all the criteria. The employee will need to sign an agreement that would be drafted by your general counsel that would incorporate the criteria components, assuming you pass this policy, resolution, agreeing to all the terms and conditions and the retention incentive action. The employee must have worked with the agency for a minimum of 5 years. The employee must be in their current position at least 2 years, including acting, interim, and regular status. The employee cannot have a negative evaluation or personnel action for the prior 3 years, and the national unemployment rate must be at or below 6%. The logic there is that people are less likely to be bouncing around and leaving when the situation going to a greener pasture may end up being a toxic waste area because they get laid off due to economic situations. The employee, if allocated a retention incentive to remain with the district, must remain with the district for 1 year from the previous year of the retention. Should the employee leave before the term, as the general counsel would draft up, they would need to have that deducted from their vacation, and I will defer that detail to general counsel if and when we get to that point. No retroactive payment for vacation shall go beyond a single year incentive salary bump. The employee must provide evidence of their departure from the district is eminent. Now, eminent is broadly defined as far as I would be concerned would be somebody that's basically the finalist in a position and confirming that that's in fact the case. That the GM grant a non-reoccurring salary adjustment up to 10% of the top step of the salary range. Keep the salary retention incentive in place in the following anniversary year. The employee must maintain an above average satisfactory evaluation each year. Failure to do so, to meet that or any of the other criteria, they would lose the incentive bump. This is a policy of the board. I've shared with the board some of the reasons going into this season of the fall, why we might want to incorporate this policy now. You do have a number of temporary staff. You will be eventually retaining a general manager, so a new general manager will have a steep learning curve. So this is there to basically encourage people to stay if they meet these criteria, and that completes the report.
Yes, sir. Comments from the board? Director Slayton? No, sir? Director Scobie has a comment.
Yes, I'm not clear on the no retroactive payment from vacation shall go beyond a single year incentive salary bump.
Yeah, that is, in other words, the idea is that they would only be, the salary would only be reduced for that year that they've been compensated. So we wouldn't go back and try to capture previous years where the employee might have had a salary bump. It would just be in that single year.
Okay.
And of course, that's something that general counsel is going to have to look at to make sure that we are capable of doing that. And this is going to be something that we need to evaluate.
I also have a comment. Given we have 2 new board members and a new general counsel and coming up new general manager, it seems very important that we retain our knowledge of our district. So I think this is something that we should definitely consider.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just have a question about that the employee then just needs to stay with the district for 1 year, and then that 10% salary continues the year if they continue to stay, correct?
If they meet all the criteria.
If they meet
all the criteria.
So they would continue to get 10%.
Right, but it's not automatic. It's not a reoccurring salary. They would be eligible for the 10% bump in the next year, but they would have to meet all the criteria. It's not 10% on top of 10%.
Right. That's
it's just the 10%.
Okay.
And that's the max.
Is in 1 year standard? Is 2 years is too much, or?
It varies all over. I'm just doing it based on my experience in drafting retention policies. That's really a policy question that if the board doesn't feel comfortable with that period of time, I think there is some contract issues that general counsel will need to look at if it's beyond a year. And there may be even some issues if for only a single year.
And the concept here is that the employee would come to the
Petition,
district
yes.
and say, I have a job
Yeah,
offer.
right.
We can't make them stay, but the concept is to offer
That would be
a pay
imminent.
bump.
That would be imminent.
Yeah, offer a pay bump to retain them. And would you ever go beyond the scope of that percentage?
No, this is establishing board policy.
Okay.
So it'd have to be within that policy.
Any questions on that?
I have some additional questions.
Okay.
So in your experience, in the various jurisdictions that you've been employed with, this is not an uncommon practice, it's a common practice.
Within the jurisdictions that I've worked, yes.
Thank you.
I would like to think that the boards are staying up with trends.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean that this board rejecting this is not staying up with the trend. You know what it is. This is a tool that you can use. You just may feel that it's not applicable to this district.
So I'm very, very much in favor of retaining good employees. The cost of turnover, not to mention the loss of institutional knowledge, but the cost of training someone to come up to speed in a position. I think we've had, before this board, before the newly appointed board members a few years ago, we had some estimates on those costs. They range in the tens of thousands of dollars that it costs the district. Having said that, it seems to me that if we're not competitive, that we should be looking at that more routinely to ensure that the salary is competitive, so that the employee isn't attracted to move someplace else.
In the first place.
And in addition to that, it's hard to keep someone if they're moving on to a position that pays more because it has more responsibility and exceeds that 10%. But again, I think that there may be other circumstances that would outweigh that person's desire to leave and to seek employment elsewhere. When you mention that the departure has to be imminent, that just seems very loose to me in the policy. Is imminent providing evidence of a written job offer? I mean, is it just coming up and saying, hey, I got a job offer, how about 10% more of my salary?
Well, let's put it this way. You just went through a process where you had a second callback. A callback might be considered imminent, depending on the employee. That would be a judgment call on the general manager. If you do not want to provide that amount of flexibility, then you need to tighten the language.
And then, in terms of the employee's performance, we mentioned that they have to be above satisfactory. And again, I'm just not sure, does that mean they're just over a C student, or are they an A player? And again, it's just...
Generally, there's 4 categories in review. Above satisfactory, in many agencies, the only way you can get a salary bump, I believe, is if you can make a move on your salary scale if you're satisfactory. I believe that's current practice and policy here. So it's really taking it to another level that the employee has to really have stood out. And I'd like to come back to Director Stanton's comment. He's absolutely right that if your compensation plan is properly